They weren't monsters, they were strangers. Neighbors, hitchhikers, people we tried to help. And every single one of them followed someone home. These are 6 unexplained paranormal stories that still don't make sense. Marcus Chin had always been the kind of person who helped others. It was something his mother drilled into him from childhood. If someone needed help, you helped them. No questions asked. No hesitation. That philosophy served him well for 28 years. Until the night of October 14th, when it almost cost him everything. The rain started around 7 that evening. Not the gentle kind that taps politely against windows. This was the angry, violent sort that turned roads into rivers and made visibility almost zero. Marcus was driving home from his shift at the hospital where he worked as a radiology technician. The highway was nearly empty. Most people had the good sense to stay home. He should have done the same. But his shift had run late and he was exhausted. All he wanted was to get home, microwave some leftovers and collapse into bed. The windshield wipers were working overtime, squeaking rhythmically as they fought against the deluge. Thunder rolled overhead, deep and menacing. That's when he saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, just past the exit for Millbrook Road. A woman in a light blue raincoat, her hood pulled up, one arm extended with her thumb out. Hitchhiking in weather like this seemed insane, but Marcus could see even from a distance that she was soaked through. His mother's voice echoed in his head. If someone needs help. He slowed down, pulling onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead of her. Through his rearview mirror, he watched her hurry toward the car, her movements stiff and awkward, like someone who'd been standing in the cold for too long. Marcus unlocked the passenger door and she climbed in quickly, bringing with her the smell of rain and something else. Something faintly metallic that he couldn't quite place. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you so much." "No problem," Marcus replied, putting the car back in drive. "Where are you headed?" "Ashwood Terrace. Number 42. Her voice was flat, almost mechanical. She kept her hood up and he could barely see her face in the darkness. "That's not far from where I live actually. Just a few streets over." Marcus tried to sound friendly, to ease what he assumed was her discomfort. Being stranded in a storm would make anyone anxious. "What happened? Car breakdown?" "Something like that." The response was clipped. She didn't elaborate. Marcus glanced at her from the corner of his eye. Water dripped from her coat onto his passenger seat, forming a small puddle at her feet. Her hands were folded in her lap, pale and motionless. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You look pretty cold." "I'm fine." Another short response. Marcus decided not to push it. Some people didn't like small talk. That was fine. He turned his attention back to the road, squinting through the rain-blurred windshield. The drive to Ashwood Terrace should have taken about 10 minutes. The neighborhood was older, with large houses set back from the street, separated by tall trees and overgrown hedges. It had been nice once, decades ago, but now it had that neglected quality that made it feel slightly unwelcoming even in daylight. In the storm it looked downright eerie. Marcus navigated the winding roads carefully, his headlights cutting weak paths through the darkness. The woman beside him hadn't moved or spoken since her last response. She sat perfectly still, her breathing so quiet he sometimes wondered if she was breathing at all. "So, do you live alone?" Marcus asked, immediately regretting the question. It sounded creepy, like he was gathering information for some nefarious purpose. "I mean, is someone home who can help you warm up? Get some dry clothes?" "No one's home." The way she said it made something cold settle in Marcus's stomach. There was no emotion in her voice. No fear, no sadness, nothing. Just blank statement of fact. "Well, you should get into something warm as soon as you can," he said, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. "Maybe make some tea or—" "Here." The word cut him off. He looked around, confused. They were still on the main road, nowhere near any houses. "I'm sorry? Here. This is it." She was pointing to a narrow driveway that appeared suddenly on the right, almost hidden by overgrown bushes. Marcus turned in, his tires crunching over gravel. The driveway was longer than he expected, winding through dense trees that blocked out what little light remained. And then the house appeared. Number 42 Ashwood Terrace. It was a two-story Victorian, probably beautiful once, but time had not been kind. The paint was peeling, the shutters hung crooked, and several windows on the upper floor were broken. The front porch sagged in the middle, and weeds had overtaken what might have once been a garden. The place looked abandoned. "You live here?" Marcus couldn't keep the doubt from his voice. "Yes." She opened the door before he'd fully stopped the car, stepping out into the rain without another word. No goodbye, no thank you, nothing. She walked toward the house with that same stiff gait, her figure quickly disappearing into the darkness. Marcus sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the empty house. No lights came on. No door opened that he could see. The woman simply vanished into the shadows around the building. Something felt deeply wrong. But what could he do? She'd asked for a ride, he'd given her one, and now she was home. That was it. That was all. He was probably just letting the storm and the creepy house get to him. Marcus put the car in reverse and began backing down the long driveway. That's when he noticed it. The puddle on his passenger seat. The water she'd dripped from her soaked raincoat hadn't just pooled on the seat. It had run down to the floor, and in the dim light of his dashboard, he could see it clearly now. It wasn't clear. It was red. Dark red, almost black in the low light. Marcus slammed on the brakes, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. He reached over and touched the liquid with one finger, then brought it close to his face. Blood. His passenger had been bleeding. Heavily. "Oh God," he whispered, his mind racing. Had she been injured? Was she hurt and too shocked to say anything? Was that why she seemed so strange, so distant? He had to check on her. He had to make sure she was okay. Marcus threw the car into park and grabbed his phone, turning on the flashlight. He stepped out into the rain, which immediately soaked through his scrubs. The cold was shocking, but he barely noticed. He ran toward the house, his shoes squelching in the mud. "Hey," he called out. "Miss? Are you okay? I think you're hurt." No answer. He reached the front porch and climbed the creaking steps. The front door was weathered wood, with a small window set at eye level. He knocked hard, the sound hollow and wrong. "Hello? I just want to make sure you're all right." Still nothing. Marcus tried the doorknob. To his surprise, it turned easily. The door swung inward with a low groan, revealing darkness beyond. "I'm coming in," he announced, mostly to himself. "I think you need help." He stepped inside, his phone's flashlight sweeping across the interior. The house was not abandoned. It was furnished. Old furniture covered in dust, but arranged as if someone lived there. A couch, a coffee table, a television from at least 20 years ago. Pictures hung on the walls, though he couldn't make out the details in the darkness. "Hello." His voice echoed in the empty space. Marcus moved deeper into the house, his flashlight beam dancing across surfaces. The air smelled stale and damp, with an underlying odor of decay that made his nose wrinkle. He could hear the rain hammering against the roof, and somewhere in the house water was dripping steadily. He passed through what looked like a dining room, then into a kitchen. Old dishes sat in the sink. A calendar hung on the wall, still turned to March. March of 8 years ago. What the hell was this place? "Miss? Are you here?" A sound from upstairs. A soft thump, like something being set down. Marcus turned toward the staircase in the foyer. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to leave, to get back in his car and drive away and forget this whole thing. But the blood. The blood on his passenger seat meant she was hurt, possibly dying. He couldn't just leave. He started climbing the stairs, each step creaking under his weight. The sound was loud in the silence, announcing his presence to whatever waited above. The second-floor hallway stretched out before him, doors on either side, all closed except one at the far end. Pale light spilled from that room, flickering like candlelight. Marcus approached slowly, his mouth dry, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Hello? I just want to help. I think you're injured." He reached the doorway and looked inside. It was a bedroom. A woman's bedroom, decorated in soft blues and whites. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing that soaked blue raincoat, was his passenger. She was facing away from him, her hood still up. "Thank God," Marcus breathed. "Listen, you're hurt. I found blood in my car. We need to get you to a hospital." She didn't move. "Please let me help you." Slowly, so slowly it seemed to take forever, she turned her head to look at him. And Marcus's blood turned to ice. Her face. Oh God, her face. The skin was gray and waxy, stretched too tight over the bones. Her eyes were clouded, the whites yellowed and bloodshot. Her lips were blue, pulled back slightly to reveal teeth that were too dark, too stained. She looked like a corpse. She looked like she'd been dead for days. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice wet and thick, "for bringing me home." Marcus stumbled backward, his phone slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. The light spun crazily before settling in a position that illuminated her from below, making her appear even more grotesque. What are you?" She stood up slowly, water and blood dripping from her coat onto the floor. "I've been trying to get home for so long. So many people just drive past. But you stopped. You were kind. Stay away from me." Marcus's voice was shaking. He felt along the wall behind him, trying to find the doorway without taking his eyes off her. "I just wanted to come home." She took a step toward him, her movements jerky and unnatural. "I just wanted to be in my room again. To see my things. To remember what it was like." "What happened to you?" "Someone gave me a ride," she said, tilting her head at an angle that was wrong, too far, like a bird examining prey. "A long time ago. He seemed nice at first. He said he'd take me home. But he didn't take me home. He took me somewhere else. Somewhere dark." Marcus felt his back hit the door frame. He spun around and ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind him, he heard her following, her footsteps irregular and heavy. "Don't go," she called out. "I need to thank you properly." He reached the bottom of the stairs and sprinted for the front door. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely grab the handle. Behind him, she was descending the stairs, moving faster than should have been possible with that stiff, awkward gait. "You were so kind to me." Marcus yanked the door open and burst out into the rain. He ran for his car, his feet sliding in the mud. He could hear her behind him, getting closer, her breathing wet and ragged. He reached the car and threw himself inside, slamming the door and hitting the lock. His hands fumbled for the keys. Where were the keys? He'd left them in the ignition. Thank God, thank God. He turned the engine over and it roared to life. Through the windshield, illuminated by his headlights, she stood in front of the car. Just stood there, motionless, staring at him with those dead eyes. Rain poured down around her, but she didn't move. Marcus threw the car into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun in the mud before finding purchase. He looked over his shoulder as he backed down the driveway at dangerous speed, not caring about the branches scraping his car. When he looked forward again, she was gone. He made it to the main road, his entire body shaking, his breath coming in short gasps. He didn't slow down until he was several miles away, back in a more populated area where the streetlights pushed back the darkness. Only then did he pull over, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. What the hell just happened? After several minutes of just breathing, trying to calm his racing heart, Marcus fumbled for his phone. It wasn't in his pocket. He remembered he'd dropped it in the house in that bedroom. Damn it. He'd have to use his backup phone when he got home. He'd call the police, tell them what? That he picked up a dead woman who wanted to go home? They'd think he was insane. But the blood in his car was real. That was evidence of something. Marcus looked over at the passenger seat. It was dry. Completely dry. No water. No blood. No sign that anyone had ever sat there. He ran his hand over the fabric, feeling for dampness. Nothing. He checked the floor. Also dry. No, he whispered. No. Was there. I saw it. I touched it. But there was nothing. No evidence at all that he'd had a passenger. Marcus sat there in his idling car, the rain hammering on the roof, trying to make sense of what he'd experienced. Had he imagined all of it? Was he losing his mind? He'd been tired, stressed from work, maybe he'd fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. But it felt so real. He took a deep breath and put the car back in drive. He just needed to get home. Get inside. Lock the doors. Everything would make sense in the morning. The drive to his apartment took 15 minutes. He lived in a small one-bedroom place on the 3rd floor of an older building. Nothing fancy, but it was home. Safe. Normal. Marcus parked in his assigned spot and sat there for a moment, gathering himself. The rain had finally started to let up, reduced to a light drizzle. He grabbed his bag from the back seat and got out, locking the car behind him. The parking lot was empty and quiet except for the sound of water dripping from gutters. Security lights cast pools of yellow illumination. Marcus walked toward the entrance of his building, his shoes squelching with each step. He climbed the exterior stairs to the 3rd floor, his keys already in his hand. When he reached his door, number 3F, he paused. Something felt wrong. The door was unlocked. He always locked his door. Always. It was automatic, ingrained habit. Slowly, carefully, Marcus pushed the door open. His living room was dark except for the light from the parking lot filtering through the windows. Everything looked normal. His couch against one wall, his TV across from it, the small dining table near the kitchen entrance. Everything normal. Except, there was someone sitting on his couch. Marcus's hand found the light switch and he flipped it on. The woman in the blue raincoat sat on his couch, her hood still up, water dripping onto his floor. She turned her head slowly to look at him, and even though he couldn't see her face clearly in the shadow of the hood, he knew what he would see if he could. Those dead eyes. That gray skin. "Hello, Marcus," she said softly. "I wanted to thank you for bringing me home." "This isn't your home," he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "This is my home." She tilted her head, considering. "I know. But you were so kind to me. And I've been alone for so long. So very long. I thought maybe—" She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was sad, almost wistful. "I thought maybe I could stay here. With you. So I'm never alone again." Marcus backed toward the door, but it swung shut behind him with a soft click. The lock engaged on its own. "You're kind, Marcus. Your mother raised you to help people." The woman stood up from the couch, water streaming from her coat. "I just need help. That's all. I just need someone to be with me. Forever." She stepped toward him, and Marcus could see her face clearly now in the light of his living room. The gray skin. The clouded eyes. The blue lips pulled back in what might have been meant as a smile. And he understood, with absolute crystal clarity, that she would never leave. That his act of kindness had bound them together in some way he couldn't understand. That she had been waiting on that road for someone like him. Someone who would stop. Someone who would help. Someone whose home she could follow them to. "Please," Marcus whispered, pressing himself against the door. "Please just go." "I can't," she said simply. "I died on that road 8 years ago. The man who picked me up made sure I never made it home. And I've been trying to get back ever since. But I can't find it anymore. My home is gone. So I need a new one." She was standing right in front of him now, close enough that he could smell the decay, could see the water droplets on her dead skin catching the light. "You brought me home, Marcus. This is home now." Marcus tried to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. All he could do was stare into those dead eyes as she reached out one cold, wet hand and placed it gently on his cheek. "Don't worry," she whispered. "You won't be alone either. I'll always be here. Always." The lights in the apartment flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. In the darkness, Marcus heard her voice one more time, soft and sad and terribly, terribly final. "Thank you for being kind." The police found Marcus Chin 3 days later after he failed to show up for his shift at the hospital and his supervisor called for a wellness check. The officers who entered the apartment found it empty, undisturbed, with no signs of struggle or foul play. Marcus was gone. His car was still in the parking lot, his keys on the kitchen counter, his phone charging by his bed. But Marcus himself had simply vanished, as if he'd stepped out of his own life and never returned. The only unusual detail the police noted in their report was the condition of his living room couch. It was soaked through with water, with a large stain that had seeped deep into the cushions. The water had a faint reddish tint that couldn't be explained. And if any of the officers had checked, which they didn't, they would have found something else strange. Something impossible. The water was ice cold. And it never dried. Not even after they removed the couch. Not even after they cleaned the floor. That spot remained perpetually damp, a cold wet patch that no amount of heat or airflow could evaporate. Almost as if someone was still sitting there, dripping, waiting for the next kind person to offer them a ride home. 4 weeks, Marcus Chen's dog refused to walk past an abandoned house on Millbrook Road, until one night, something inside growled back at him. Marcus had adopted Brutus from a shelter 3 months earlier. The dog was a German Shepherd mix, about 4 years old, with scars on his back legs that the shelter workers said came from abuse. They warned Marcus that Brutus might be skittish around loud noises or sudden movements. But in those first few weeks, the dog seemed perfectly fine. Calm. Obedient. Maybe a little too quiet sometimes, but Marcus figured that was just his personality. The walk started normally enough. Every evening around 7, Marcus would clip the leash onto Brutus's collar and they'd head out. Their route was simple: down Ashford Street, left on Millbrook, loop around the park, then back home. Nothing complicated. Nothing that should have caused any problems. But on their 9th walk together, everything changed. They were halfway down Millbrook Road when Brutus suddenly stopped. Just planted his feet and refused to move forward. Marcus tugged gently on the leash, the way the shelter's training pamphlet suggested. Nothing. He tried a firmer pull. Brutus dug his claws into the pavement and let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the sidewalk. Marcus looked around, trying to figure out what had spooked him. The street was empty. No cars. No other dogs. Just rows of quiet houses with their porch lights glowing in the twilight. Then he noticed where Brutus was staring. The Garrison house. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about it. Old colonial-style place with peeling gray paint and windows so filthy you couldn't see through them anymore. The yard was overgrown with weeds that reached up past the first-floor windows, and the front porch sagged in the middle like a broken spine. It had been empty for at least 5 years, maybe longer. Some people said the last owner died in there and nobody claimed the property. Others said there was a legal dispute that kept it in limbo. Marcus had walked past it dozens of times before Brutus came into his life. Never gave it much thought. Just another abandoned house slowly rotting in plain sight. But Brutus wouldn't move. His hackles were raised, and that low growl kept coming, steady and determined. Marcus tried coaxing him with a treat. Tried walking backwards to get some momentum going. Nothing worked. Finally, he just picked a different route, crossing to the other side of Millbrook and giving the Garrison house a wide berth. Brutus relaxed immediately once they were past it. Marcus figured it was a one-time thing. Maybe the dog smelled a dead animal in the yard or picked up on some weird sound humans couldn't hear. Dogs were sensitive like that. He didn't think much of it. Until it happened again the next night. And the night after that. And every single night for the next 3 weeks. Same spot. Same reaction. Brutus would stop about 20 feet from the property line, his whole body going rigid, and that growl would start up again. Deep and continuous like distant thunder. And he'd stare at the house with an intensity that made Marcus's skin prickle. After the first week, Marcus started taking photos of the house on his phone, trying to spot whatever Brutus was reacting to. He zoomed in on the windows looking for movement or shadows. He studied the yard for signs of animals or intruders. Nothing. The place looked exactly the same every single day. Dead. Empty. Forgotten. But Brutus knew something. On the 18th night, Marcus decided to test a theory. Instead of their usual 7 o'clock walk, he took Brutus out at 5 in the afternoon while it was still fully light outside. He wanted to see if the time of day made any difference. Maybe Brutus was reacting to shadows or the way the evening light hit the house. They approached the garrison property. Brutus's ears went flat against his head. The growling started. Same reaction, same spot, same intensity. Time of day didn't matter. Marcus tried again at 9 at night. Then at 6 in the morning before work. Every single time Brutus had the same response. It wasn't about darkness or light or the time on the clock. It was about that house. Something in or around that property set off every alarm in the dog's brain. Marcus mentioned it to his neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, an elderly woman who'd lived on the street for 40 years. She was watering her roses when Marcus stopped to chat, Brutus sitting obediently at his side, though they were 3 houses down from the garrison place. That house has always been trouble, Mrs. Kowalski said, not looking up from her flowers. Even when the garrisons lived there. Something wrong with that property. Marcus asked what she meant. She set down her watering can and finally met his eyes. The family that built it back in 1923, the Hawthorns, they only lived there for 2 years before they abandoned it. Just walked away one day and never came back. Left everything inside. Furniture, clothes, photographs. Everything. The bank tried to sell it but nobody would buy it. Then the garrisons bought it in 1967 for almost nothing. They lasted 6 years before they left too. And from what I heard, they didn't just leave. They ran. She picked up her watering can again, signaling the conversation was over. But as Marcus started to walk away, she added one more thing. Animals know. They always know first. That night, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about what Mrs. Kowalski had said. He lay in bed with his laptop, searching for information about the garrison house. Property records showed it had changed hands 7 times since 1923. The longest anyone had stayed was 9 years. The shortest was 6 months. The current owner, according to the county assessor's website, was something called the Millbrook Property Trust. No names. No contact information. Just a P.O. box in a town 3 hours away. He found an old newspaper article from 1969. Just a brief mention in the local section. Garrison family relocates to Oregon. That was it. No explanation. No forwarding address. Like they'd been erased from the town's memory. Marcus closed his laptop and tried to sleep. But he kept thinking about Brutus's reaction. About the way the dog stared at that house like it was staring back. On the 23rd night, Marcus made a decision. He was going to walk right up to the house. Stand at the property line. See if he could figure out what was setting Brutus off. Maybe there was a logical explanation. A colony of raccoons in the basement. Structural damage causing weird vibrations. Something normal that just happened to trigger the dog's instincts. They left at the usual time. 7 o'clock. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving that gray-blue twilight that makes everything look slightly unreal. As they approached Millbrook Road, Marcus could feel his own heart rate picking up. Brutus's posture changed the moment they turned the corner. Head down. Ears back. That low growl starting up. But this time Marcus didn't stop. He kept walking, pulling Brutus gently but firmly toward the house. The dog resisted, all 4 legs locked, but Marcus was stronger. They crossed the street. Got within 15 feet of the property line. 10 feet. 5. Brutus's growl got louder, more desperate. Marcus stopped at the edge of the overgrown yard, right where the sidewalk met the property. He stood there holding the leash tight and looked at the house. Really looked at it. The windows were dark. The kind of dark that doesn't just mean no lights on. The kind of dark that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The front door was barely visible behind the overgrown weeds, but Marcus could make out peeling green paint and a tarnished brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound except for Brutus's continuous growling. Marcus stood there for a full minute, scanning every window, every shadow, every corner of the property. There was nothing. Just an old house falling apart. He was about to turn around when Brutus suddenly lunged backward so hard that the leash burned Marcus's palm. The dog let out a sharp, terrified yelp, something Marcus had never heard from him before, and began pulling with every ounce of strength he had. And that's when Marcus heard it. A growl. Deep and guttural. Coming from inside the house. But it wasn't like Brutus's growl. It was lower. Longer. And it had a quality that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. It sounded almost human. Like someone trying to imitate a dog's growl but not quite getting it right. Marcus stumbled backward, his grip on the leash loosening just enough for Brutus to bolt. The dog took off down the street at a dead run, the leash trailing behind him. Marcus followed, his legs moving on pure instinct, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. He caught up with Brutus 2 blocks away. The dog had stopped in front of their house, panting and shaking. Marcus's hands were trembling as he unlocked the front door and they both practically fell inside. He locked the door behind them, then checked it twice more to make sure. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat in his living room with all the lights on, Brutus pressed against his leg, and tried to convince himself that he'd imagined it. That it was just the wind or a stray cat or his own mind playing tricks on him. But he knew what he'd heard. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work. He spent 3 hours online digging deeper into the history of the Garrison house. He found an archived forum post from 2008. Someone asking if anyone remembered the family that used to live on Millbrook Road in the old colonial house. Only one person had replied. I remember them. The father was strange. Used to walk his property at night. My mom said she saw him once, down on all fours in the yard, and when her car headlights hit him, his eyes reflected back at her. Like an animal. They left town after the youngest daughter went missing. Never found her. Marcus read that line 3 times. Never found her. He searched for missing persons cases in Millbrook from the late 60s. Found a brief article from 1973. 7-year-old Rebecca Garrison. Last seen playing in her backyard. Extensive search conducted. No trace ever found. Case remained open. Marcus felt sick. That evening he changed their walking route. Took Brutus down a completely different street, adding 10 minutes to their usual loop just to avoid Millbrook Road entirely. Brutus seemed relieved. The tension that had been in his body for weeks finally eased. For 3 days everything was fine. Normal walks. No growling. No abandoned houses. Marcus started to relax. Maybe that was it. Maybe staying away was all he needed to do. On the 4th night, Marcus made a mistake. He'd had a long day at work. His boss had been on his case about a deadline, and he'd stayed late trying to finish a project. By the time he got home, it was almost 9. He was tired and distracted, his mind still half focused on work. When he clipped the leash to Brutus's collar and headed out, he wasn't paying attention to where he was walking. Muscle memory took over. His feet followed the old route. Down Ashford Street. Left on Millbrook. He didn't realize his mistake until Brutus stopped dead in his tracks. Marcus looked up. His stomach dropped. They were 50 feet from the Garrison house. But something was different this time. The front door was open. Not wide open. Just cracked. Maybe 6 inches. But Marcus was certain, absolutely certain, that it had been closed the last time he'd seen it. closed and probably locked and barricaded by years of neglect. Brutus wasn't growling. He was making a different sound now. A high-pitched whine that sounded almost like crying. His whole body was shaking. Marcus should have turned around. Should have grabbed Brutus and run. But something stopped him. A thought that had been nagging at him since he'd read about Rebecca Garrison. A 7-year-old girl who'd vanished from that property and never been found. What if she was still in there? The thought was insane. The girl had disappeared over 50 years ago. But Marcus couldn't shake it. The growl he'd heard hadn't sounded like an animal. It had sounded like something pretending to be an animal. And that open door felt like an invitation. Or a trap. Marcus tied Brutus's leash to a street sign. The dog whined louder, pulling against the restraint, but Marcus couldn't risk bringing him closer. He took out his phone and turned on the flashlight. Then he started walking toward the house. The overgrown grass rustled around his legs as he pushed through the yard. The smell hit him before he reached the porch, mildew and rot and something else underneath it. Something sweet and sickly that made his eyes water. He climbed the porch steps. They creaked under his weight, the wood soft and spongy with decay. The open door was right in front of him now. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness inside, revealing a narrow hallway with faded floral wallpaper and a staircase leading up to the second floor. Marcus pushed the door open wider. It swung on rusted hinges with a long drawn-out squeal. "Hello?" His voice came out rough and uncertain. "Is anyone in here?" Silence. He stepped inside. The floor groaned under his feet. His flashlight swept across the hallway, catching glimpses of a life abandoned decades ago. A coat rack with a child's jacket still hanging on it. A small pair of red shoes lined up neatly by the wall. Family photos in dusty frames. Marcus moved deeper into the house. To his right was a living room with furniture covered in white sheets that had turned gray with time. To his left was what looked like a dining room. The table was still set with plates and cups, as if someone had been about to eat dinner and just never came back. He heard something then. A soft scraping sound coming from upstairs. Like something being dragged across the floor. Every instinct Marcus had screamed at him to leave. But his feet kept moving. Toward the staircase. Up the steps. One at a time. Each one groaning louder than the last. The second floor hallway was darker. His flashlight beam seemed weaker up here, swallowed by the thick shadows. There were 4 doors. 3 closed. 1 open. The scraping sound came again. From the open door. Marcus approached it slowly. His hands were shaking so badly that the flashlight beam wobbled across the walls. He reached the doorway and shined his light inside. It was a child's bedroom. Pink wallpaper with faded unicorns. A small bed with a tattered quilt. Toys scattered across the floor. And on the wall, written in something dark and crusted, were the words, "Hide and seek." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He stepped into the room, his flashlight beam moving across the walls, the floor, the closet door that was slightly ajar. That's when he saw it. In the corner of the room, half hidden behind an overturned toy chest, was a pile of bones. Small bones. Child-sized bones. Some still had scraps of fabric clinging to them. A red dress. The same color as the shoes downstairs. Marcus's flashlight slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The beam rolled, casting wild shadows across the room. And in those moving shadows he saw something else. A figure. It was crouched in the corner by the window. Its back was to him. Its shoulders were hunched. And it was breathing. Marcus could hear it. Slow and raspy. The figure turned its head. Not all the way around. Just enough for Marcus to see its profile. The skin was gray and papery, stretched too tight over the skull. The jaw was wrong. Too long. Too hinged. Like it could open wider than any human jaw should. And then it smiled. Marcus ran. He didn't remember getting down the stairs or through the hallway or out the front door. He just suddenly found himself in the yard, his lungs burning, his vision blurred with tears. He could hear Brutus barking frantically. The dog had chewed through his leash and was running toward him. They ran together. Down Millbrook Road. Past Mrs. Kowalski's house. Past every familiar landmark. They didn't stop until they were home. Marcus slammed the door shut and locked it. Then he grabbed his phone and called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. Marcus tried to explain what he'd seen, but the words came out jumbled and frantic. The officers exchanged a look. The kind of look that said they thought he was either drunk or crazy. But they agreed to check the house. Marcus waited in his living room, Brutus pressed against his legs, while the officers drove to Millbrook Road. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. Then an hour. When they finally came back, their expressions were carefully neutral. "Mr. Chin," one of them said. "We checked the property. The front door was closed and locked. There's no sign of forced entry. No sign that anyone's been inside that house in years." Marcus stared at them. "But I was just in there. The door was open. I saw." "We understand you're concerned," the other officer interrupted. "But there's nothing there. The house is secure. If you're worried about squatters in the neighborhood, we can increase patrols in this area." They left a few minutes later. Marcus knew they didn't believe him. And maybe they were right to be skeptical. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe the stress and the lack of sleep and Brutus's constant fear had gotten into his head and created something that wasn't real. But then he looked at his hands. There was dirt under his fingernails. And his shoes were covered in the same overgrown grass that filled the garrison yard. Marcus didn't walk past the garrison house again. He avoided Millbrook Road completely. Even drove a different route to work so he wouldn't have to see it. For 2 weeks, everything seemed normal. The fear started to fade. He convinced himself that he'd had some kind of psychological break. That what he'd seen wasn't real. Until Brutus started acting strange again. The dog would sit at the front window for hours, staring out at the street. That low growl would start up in his throat. And sometimes, late at night, Marcus would wake up to find Brutus standing at the bedroom door, hackles raised, staring at something Marcus couldn't see. On the 15th night, Marcus woke up around 3 in the morning. Brutus was growling again. But this time the dog wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at the window. Marcus sat up slowly. The curtains were open. He could see the street outside, empty and quiet under the yellow glow of the street lights. Nothing moved. Nothing seemed out of place. But Brutus's growl was getting louder. More urgent. And then Marcus saw it. At the edge of his front yard, barely visible in the shadows between street lights, was a figure. It was standing perfectly still. His posture was wrong. The way it held itself was wrong. The proportions of its body were wrong. Marcus's blood turned to ice. The figure took a step forward. Into the light. It was the thing from the Garrison house. The thing that had been crouched in the corner of Rebecca Garrison's bedroom. Its gray, papery skin. Its too long jaw. Its smile that showed too many teeth. It took another step. Closer to the house. Marcus grabbed his phone with shaking hands. Called 911. Told them someone was in his yard. Gave them his address. The dispatcher said officers were on their way. But the thing kept coming. Slow and deliberate. Up the walkway. Onto the porch. Marcus could hear it now. Breathing. Just like he'd heard in that bedroom. Slow and raspy and wrong. The front door handle started to turn. Brutus erupted into wild barking. Marcus jumped out of bed and ran to the door, throwing his whole weight against it. The handle kept turning. Something was pushing from the other side. And then it spoke. Its voice was wet and crackling, like someone trying to speak with a mouth full of broken glass. "Found you," Marcus screamed. Brutus was snarling and snapping at the door. The handle was still turning. The door was starting to open, pushing against Marcus's weight. He could see gray fingers wrapping around the edge of the door. Fingers that were too long. With too many joints. And then suddenly red and blue lights flooded the street. Sirens wailed. The pressure on the door stopped. The gray fingers withdrew. Marcus heard footsteps running away. Fast. Unnatural. Like an animal galloping on two legs. The police searched his yard. They searched the street. They searched for 2 hours. They found nothing. No tracks. No evidence that anyone had been there at all. But Marcus had seen it. Brutus had seen it. And when the officers finally left, when the sun started to rise and the street slowly came back to life, Marcus made a decision. He packed 2 bags. One for him. One for Brutus. He loaded them into his car, locked up his house, and drove. He didn't know where he was going. Just away. Away from Millbrook Road. Away from the Garrison house. Away from whatever had been hiding in that abandoned property for over 50 years. He drove for 6 hours before he stopped at a motel in a town he'd never heard of. Checked in under a fake name. Paid in cash. That night, he lay in bed with Brutus curled up beside him, and for the first time in weeks the dog didn't growl. Marcus never went back to his house. Never went back to Millbrook Road. He called his boss and quit. Called his landlord and broke his lease. Lost his security deposit. Didn't care. Because whatever was in that house, whatever had taken Rebecca Garrison all those years ago, whatever had been imitating a dog's growl through those filthy windows, it had found him. It knew where he lived. And Marcus knew with absolute certainty that if he ever went back, it would be waiting. The Garrison house still stands on Millbrook Road. Empty. Abandoned. Slowly rotting away. And sometimes, late at night, people walking past say they can hear something inside. A sound that's almost like a dog growling. But not quite. And if you listen closely, if you stop and really pay attention, you can hear something else underneath it. A voice. Wet and crackling and wrong. Calling out words that sound like they might be names. Looking for its next game of hide and seek. The man who moved in next door greeted Sarah Mitchell by name, and knew things about her life she'd never told anyone. Sarah had lived in apartment 4B for 3 years. It was a quiet building in a quiet part of town, the kind of place where neighbors kept to themselves, and that was exactly how everyone liked it. The apartment next to hers, 4C, had been empty for the past 8 months. The previous tenant had moved out suddenly, leaving in the middle of the night according to the building manager. Sarah never asked why. It wasn't her business. But on a Tuesday morning in late October, she saw the moving truck. It was parked in the loading zone when she left for work, and 2 men were carrying a leather couch through the lobby doors. Sarah didn't think much of it. New neighbors came and went. She'd probably see them in the hallway eventually, exchange polite nods, and that would be that. She got home that evening around 6:30. The building was quiet like always. She climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, her keys already in her hand. As she reached her door, she heard the sound of another door opening. Sarah. She turned. A man was standing in the doorway of 4C. He was smiling at her. Mid-40s maybe. Average height. Thin build. Dark hair graying at the temples. Wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a cardigan over a button-down shirt. He looked like a librarian or a college professor. Completely unremarkable. Except he just said her name. "I'm sorry?" Sarah said. "You're Sarah Mitchell, right? From 4B. His smile widened. "I'm David. David Klein. I just moved in. Looks like we're going to be neighbors." Sarah felt a small prickle of unease, but she pushed it down. "Nice to meet you. How did you know my name?" "Oh, the building manager mentioned it when I signed the lease. Said you were quiet, kept to yourself. A good neighbor to have." He leaned against his doorframe, still smiling. "She also mentioned you work at Riverside Medical. Pediatric nursing, right? That must be rewarding." The prickle of unease grew stronger. "She told you where I work?" "Just in passing. You know how people talk." David shrugged. "Anyway, I won't keep you. I'm sure you're tired after a long shift. Have a good night, Sarah." He stepped back into his apartment and closed the door before she could respond. Sarah stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at his closed door. Something about the conversation felt off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what. Building managers didn't usually share tenant information like that. But maybe it had just come up naturally. Maybe she was being paranoid. She unlocked her door and went inside. That night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She tried to remember if she'd ever met the building manager in person, if she'd ever mentioned where she worked. She didn't think so. Her lease had been handled entirely through email. She dropped off the deposit and first month's rent in person, but the manager hadn't been there. Just a Dropbox for payments. Around midnight she heard sounds through the wall. Footsteps. Something being dragged across the floor. Normal moving in noises. She told herself to relax and eventually fell asleep. The next morning Sarah left for work at 7. As she locked her door, she heard David's door open behind her. "Morning, Sarah." She turned. He was standing in his doorway again, dressed in the same style of clothes. Different cardigan, same smile. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "Heading to work? I thought your shift didn't start until 8. Sarah's stomach dropped. "How do you know when my shift starts?" David blinked at her like the question confused him. "You just mentioned it yesterday. When we talked." "No, I didn't." "Are you sure?" "I could have sworn." He shook his head. "Sorry, I must have misheard. My mistake. Have a good day at work." He closed his door again. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway. She knew she hadn't mentioned her shift time. They'd barely spoken for a minute, and the way he'd said it so casually, like he was referencing something they'd discussed at length. She pulled out her phone and texted her friend Rachel. "New neighbor is weird. Knows things about me he shouldn't." Rachel texted back immediately, "Like what?" "Where I work. When my shifts are." Called me by my full name before I introduced myself. Creepy. Maybe he looked you up online? Sarah hadn't thought of that. She opened Facebook on her phone and searched for her own name. Her profile was set to private. No information visible except her profile picture, which she'd set to a photo of her cat. She checked Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Everything was locked down or didn't mention her workplace. Still, Rachel was probably right. There had to be a logical explanation. Over the next week, Sarah kept running into David. Not just in the hallway but everywhere. At the grocery store on Thursday. At the coffee shop on Saturday morning. At the park where she jogged on Sunday afternoon. Each time he'd smile and wave. Make small talk. And each time he'd mention something he shouldn't know. "How's your sister doing? I heard she just had surgery. Did you finish that book you were reading? The mystery novel? Your cat seems to be doing better. I'm glad the vet figured out what was wrong." Sarah never told him about her sister's surgery. She never mentioned she was reading a mystery novel. She never said anything about taking her cat to the vet. She stopped responding to his greetings. Started taking the stairs instead of the elevator to avoid running into him. Changed her jogging route. Went to a different coffee shop. But he was always there anyway. On Friday night, 2 weeks after David moved in, Sarah came home late. She'd picked up an extra shift and was exhausted. All she wanted was to take a shower and collapse into bed. She climbed the stairs to the 4th floor and started down the hallway toward her apartment. David's door was open. Not wide open. Just cracked. Maybe 3 inches. Enough to see that the lights inside were off. Sarah slowed her pace as she approached. She told herself to just walk past. Don't look. Don't engage. Get to your door and lock it behind you. But as she passed David's apartment, she heard something. Clicking. Rhythmic and mechanical. Like a camera shutter. Or someone typing very fast. Sarah stopped. She knew she shouldn't. Knew she should just keep walking. But something compelled her to look through that 3-inch gap. The apartment was dark except for the glow of multiple computer monitors. They were set up along one wall, at least 6 of them. And sitting in front of them, his back to the door, was David. The monitors were filled with images. It took Sarah's brain a moment to process what she was seeing. Then her blood turned to ice. They were photos of her. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Some were taken from outside her apartment windows. Some were taken inside her apartment. Photos of her sleeping. Photos of her in the shower. Photos of her getting dressed. On one monitor there was a document. A file. Sarah couldn't read most of it from this distance, but she could see the header. Sarah Mitchell, Subject 17 Observation Log. Her hands started shaking. She needed to run. Needed to call the police. Needed to. David turned around. Their eyes met through the gap in the door. He smiled. Sarah ran. She sprinted down the hallway to her apartment, her hands fumbling with her keys. She could hear David's door opening behind her. Could hear his footsteps in the hallway. Slow and casual. Not rushing. She got her door open and threw herself inside, slamming it shut and engaging every lock. The deadbolt. The chain. The floor brace she'd installed when she first moved in and never used. She pressed her back against the door, breathing hard, listening. Footsteps stopped outside her door. A soft knock. Sarah? David's voice was calm. Pleasant. Like they were having a normal conversation. I think we should talk. She didn't answer. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. There's someone outside my apartment, she whispered to the dispatcher. He's been stalking me. He has cameras. He's been watching me. The dispatcher said officers were on their way. Told her to stay on the line. Stay calm. Don't open the door. Sarah, I know you're scared, David said through the door. But you don't understand. I'm not going to hurt you. I would never hurt you. I've been protecting you. Stay away from me, Sarah said, her voice cracking. You remember 3 months ago? When that man followed you home from the subway. He was planning to hurt you, Sarah. But I stopped him. You never even knew he was there because I made sure he never got the chance. Sarah's mind raced back. 3 months ago. She'd worked a late shift. Had felt like someone was watching her on the subway ride home. But when she got off, there'd been no one there. You're insane, she said. And last year. The car that almost hit you when you crossed Spring Street. The brakes failed. But I was in the car behind it. I saw what was going to happen. I called out to you. You stopped just in time. Do you remember? She did remember. A voice shouting her name. She'd stopped in the middle of the crosswalk and a car had blown through the red light right where she would have been standing. I've been watching over you for 3 years, Sarah. Since the day you moved in. Making sure nothing bad happens to you. Keeping you safe. You broke into my apartment. You put cameras in my home. I had to make sure you were okay. That's what I do. I keep people safe. His voice was still calm. Rational. Like he genuinely believed what he was saying made sense. I've done this before. Other people. Other places. But you're special, Sarah. You're the one I was meant to protect. I know that now. Sarah heard sirens in the distance. Getting closer. The police are coming, she said. I know. I can hear them too. There was a pause. I'm going to leave now. But this isn't over, Sarah. You need me. You might not understand that yet, but you will. When something bad happens and I'm not there to stop it, you'll understand. She heard his footsteps moving away. Then the sound of the stairwell door opening and closing. The police arrived 4 minutes later. They searched David's apartment and found exactly what Sarah had described. Cameras. Monitors. Files on his computer documenting 3 years of surveillance. Photos. Videos. Detailed logs of her daily routines. Her schedule. Her habits. Places she went. People she talked to. They also found files on 17 other people. All women. All with the same level of detail. Some dating back 15 years. But they didn't find David. He was gone. Vanished. The officers put out an alert, checked his ID, ran his name through their databases. David Klein didn't exist. The man who'd moved into apartment 4C had used a fake name, fake references, fake everything. Sarah moved out that night. Stayed with Rachel. Filed a restraining order against a man whose real name she didn't even know. changed her phone number, deleted all her social media accounts. For 3 months, everything was quiet. She started to relax, started to believe maybe he'd moved on to someone else. Maybe she was finally safe. Then one morning she got a package. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Sarah walking down the street the previous day. And written on the back in neat, careful handwriting were 5 words. Still keeping you safe, David. Sarah went to the police. They increased patrols around her new apartment building, installed security cameras, did everything they could. But David was never found. And sometimes late at night, Sarah still feels it. That sensation of being watched. She'll catch a glimpse of someone in a crowd who looks familiar. A man in wire-rimmed glasses. Average height. Unremarkable. Gone before she can get a second look. She knows he's still out there. Still watching. Still believing he's protecting her. And the most terrifying part is that she'll never know when he's there. Never know which stranger on the subway or in the coffee shop or walking behind her on a dark street is him. Because that's what David does. He watches people. Protects them whether they want it or not. And according to the files the police found, he's been doing it for over 20 years. 17 women across 8 different states. Some he watched for months. Others for years. None of them ever knew he was there. Until he wanted them to know. The police detective assigned to Sarah's case told her something that still keeps her up at night. They'd interviewed the previous tenants of apartment 4C. The woman who'd left in the middle of the night 8 months before Sarah met David. Her name was Jennifer Ross. And she'd lived there for 2 years before she finally noticed the cameras. Before she finally realized someone had been watching her the entire time. Before she finally met her neighbor who knew her name before she'd ever introduced herself. The detective said Jennifer moved to Seattle. Changed her identity. Disappeared completely. And 6 months after she left, she received a package. No return address. Inside was a photograph. And written on the back in neat, careful handwriting. Still keeping you safe. After attending a stranger's funeral by mistake, James Rivera started hearing dirt being shoveled outside his bedroom every night. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when James made the wrong turn. He'd been driving to his cousin's funeral at Greenwood Cemetery when his GPS glitched and sent him to Oak Hill Memorial instead. By the time he realized the mistake, he was already pulling into the parking lot. A funeral was in progress, and James figured he'd slip in for a moment, pay his respects to whoever it was, then leave quietly and head to the right cemetery. The chapel was nearly empty. Maybe 15 people scattered across the pews. An old priest stood at the front, reading from a worn Bible. The casket was closed. Dark mahogany with brass handles. A small placard beside it read, Thomas Ashford 1947 to 2024. James sat in the back row and bowed his head. He planned to stay for just 5 minutes. Show some respect. Then leave. But something about the service felt wrong. The mourners weren't crying. They weren't even sad. They just sat there perfectly still, staring straight ahead. No one spoke. No one moved. And when the priest finished his reading, there was no eulogy. No memories shared. No hymns sung. Just silence. The priest closed his Bible and looked directly at James. Their eyes met for just a second, but it was enough to make James's skin crawl. The priest's expression was blank. Empty. Like he was looking at James but not seeing him. Then the service was over. People stood and filed out in complete silence. James waited until everyone had left before heading to his car. The whole thing had taken maybe 20 minutes. He drove to Greenwood Cemetery and made it to his cousin's funeral just as it was starting. He didn't think about the wrong funeral again until that night. James lived alone in a small house on the edge of town. Single story. Modest yard. Quiet neighborhood. He'd bought it 2 years earlier and loved how peaceful it was. His bedroom was at the back of the house, overlooking the yard and the woods beyond. Around midnight he woke to the sound of scraping. Metal against earth. Rhythmic. steady, like someone digging. James lay in bed listening. The sound was coming from outside his window. He got up and looked through the curtains. His backyard was dark except for the dim glow of the neighbor's porch light filtering through the trees. He couldn't see anyone, but the sound continued. Scrape, scrape, scrape. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it through the window. The beams swept across the grass, the garden bed, the edge of the woods. Nothing. Nobody there. But the sound didn't stop. James went outside, his phone light cutting through the darkness. He walked the perimeter of his yard, checking every corner. The sound seemed to move with him. Always just out of reach. Always behind him or beside him, but never in front where he could see. After 15 minutes, the sound stopped. James stood in the middle of his yard, his breath visible in the cold air, and waited. Silence. Just the wind in the trees and the distant hum of traffic. He went back inside and locked the door. The next night it happened again. Same time. Same sound. Scraping metal against earth. This time, James didn't bother looking out the window. He pulled the covers over his head and tried to ignore it. But the sound was too loud. Too insistent. It went on for 2 hours before finally stopping at 2 in the morning. On the third night, James set up his phone to record video. He propped it on the windowsill, aimed it at the backyard, and hit record before going to bed. Maybe he'd finally see what was causing the noise. At midnight, the scraping started. James stayed in bed this time, letting the phone record. The sound seemed louder tonight. More aggressive. Like whatever was digging was getting closer to the house. When it finally stopped at 2, James grabbed his phone and played back the video. He watched 3 hours of footage. Watched his dark, empty backyard. Watched the trees swaying in the wind. Watched nothing happening at all. But the audio was there. Clear and unmistakable. The sound of digging. For 2 solid hours. On the fourth night, James called his friend Eric and asked him to come over. Eric arrived around 11:30, skeptical but willing to humor him. "You probably just have an animal digging for grubs or something," Eric said, settling onto James's couch with a beer. "For 2 hours straight? Every night at exactly midnight?" Eric shrugged. "Possums are weird, man." They waited. At midnight, the scraping started. Eric's face went pale. "What the hell is that?" They went outside together, both armed with flashlights. The sound was deafening now. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. From the yard. From the woods. From underground. They searched for 30 minutes. Found nothing. "This is insane," Eric said. He looked genuinely scared. "You need to call someone. An exterminator or something." But James knew it wasn't an animal. He'd known since the first night. This was something else. Something wrong. On the 5th night, James decided to stay up and confront whatever it was. He sat in a chair by his bedroom window, a baseball bat across his lap, and waited. Midnight came. The scraping started. But this time James saw something. A shadow. Moving at the edge of the woods. Tall. Human-shaped. It was digging. James could see the motion of its arms. Up and down. Up and down. Scooping something invisible and throwing it aside. James's hands tightened on the bat. He stood up slowly and moved toward the back door. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He unlocked the door and stepped outside. The shadow stopped digging. It turned toward him. James's flashlight beam found it. And he immediately wished it hadn't. Was a man. Or something that used to be a man. Its skin was gray and waxy, stretched too tight over the bones. Its clothes were a dark suit, dirt-stained and torn. And its face was sunken, the eyes hollow and black. But James recognized it. It was the man from the casket. Thomas Ashford. The thing that used to be Thomas Ashford stared at James with those empty eyes. Then it smiled. Its lips pulled back to reveal teeth that were too long, too yellow. It dropped the shovel it had been holding. Except there was no shovel. Its hands were empty. Had always been empty. "You came to my funeral," it said. Its voice was dry and crackling, like wine through dead leaves. You weren't invited. James couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His legs felt like concrete. Now you have to take my place. The thing started walking toward him. Slow, deliberate. His movements were wrong. Too stiff, too angular. Like a puppet being jerked on strings. James finally found his voice. Stay away from me. You attended a funeral that wasn't yours to attend. You witnessed a burial that wasn't meant to be witnessed. Now the grave needs to be filled. It took another step closer. And you're going to fill it. James ran. He dropped the bat and sprinted back into his house, slamming the door and locking it. He could hear the thing outside, walking around the perimeter, testing the windows, the back door, looking for a way in. At 2 in the morning it stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the scraping had been. James didn't sleep. He sat in his living room with every light in the house on, a kitchen knife in his hand, and waited for sunrise. When dawn finally came, he packed a bag and drove straight to his sister's house 3 towns over. He told her everything. She believed him. She'd always been open to things that couldn't be easily explained. You need to go back to that cemetery, she said. Find out about Thomas Ashford. There has to be a reason this is happening. James didn't want to go back. But he knew she was right. That afternoon he drove to Oak Hill Memorial. The cemetery was quiet in the daylight. Almost peaceful. He found the maintenance office and asked about Thomas Ashford. The groundskeeper, an old man with kind eyes, checked his records. Thomas Ashford. Yes. We buried him 6 days ago. But there was something strange about that funeral. Strange how? Well, nobody claimed the body. He died alone in his house. No family. No friends. The county paid for the burial. We had to scramble to find a priest willing to do the service. The groundskeeper paused. And then there was the other thing. What other thing? When we were preparing the grave, we found something. An old journal buried about 3 feet down. From the 1890s. It belonged to a man who used to be the caretaker here. He wrote about strange rituals. About how certain people who died without anyone to mourn them would become something else. Something hungry. They'd look for someone to take their place in the grave. James felt his blood turn to ice. How do you stop it? The groundskeeper met his eyes. According to the journal, you have to go to the grave at midnight. Alone. And you have to give something back. Give what back? Whatever you took from the funeral. Even if you didn't mean to take it. That night, James returned to Oak Hill Memorial. He arrived at 11:30 and waited in his car until midnight. Then he walked through the cemetery, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, until he found Thomas Ashford's grave. The dirt was freshly turned. No headstone yet. Just a simple wooden marker with the name carved into it. James stood at the edge of the grave and spoke into the darkness. I didn't mean to come to your funeral. I made a mistake. But I'm here now to give back what I took. Silence. Just the wind in the trees. I witnessed your burial. I gave you my time. My respect. Even though I didn't know you. So I'm giving it back. I'm releasing you from this. I'm sorry no one was there to mourn you properly. For a long moment nothing happened. Then James felt something shift in the air. A presence lifting. A weight releasing. The feeling of being watched disappeared. James stood there for another 10 minutes, but the graveyard remained quiet. No scraping. No shadows. No gray figure watching from the darkness. He drove home and slept through the night without incident. The scraping never came back. The shadow never returned. Whatever had followed James home from that funeral had finally moved on. But sometimes, late at night, James thinks about Thomas Ashford. About a man who died alone. Who had no one to mourn him. Who became something terrible because of that loneliness. And he wonders how many other graves and how many other cemeteries hold people just like Thomas. Waiting for someone to accidentally stumble into their funeral. Waiting for someone to take their place. Because the thing about attending the wrong funeral is that you never really know what you're walking into. You never know whose death you're witnessing, or what that death might want from you in return. James never made another wrong turn to a cemetery again. And whenever he passes Oak Hill Memorial, he drives a little faster and keeps his eyes straight ahead. Because some mistakes can follow you home. And some debts are paid in ways you never see coming. James Porter dropped the hitchhiker off safely, but his rearview mirror kept showing him sitting behind him. It was a Thursday night in early November when James saw the man on the side of Highway 47. The rain was coming down hard, the kind that turns your windshield into a wall of water even with the wipers on full blast. James was driving back from a sales conference 3 hours from home, tired and ready to be in his own bed. That's when his headlights caught the figure standing on the shoulder of the road. The man had his thumb out, a soaked backpack at his feet. He was maybe 30 years old, wearing a gray hoodie that was plastered to his body from the rain. James's first instinct was to drive past. You don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. Everyone knows that. But something made him slow down. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was because the highway was completely empty and the man looked miserable. Maybe James was just too tired to think straight. He pulled over. The man jogged up to the passenger window and James rolled it down a few inches. "You need a ride?" James called out over the sound of the rain. "If you're offering." The man's voice was quiet, polite. "Just heading to Millerton. It's about 20 miles up the road." Millerton was on James's route home. He unlocked the doors. The man tossed his backpack into the back seat and climbed into the passenger side. Water dripped from his clothes onto the floor mat. He was thin with dark hair and a pale complexion. His eyes were deep-set and shadowed. "Thanks for stopping," the man said. "Not many people do anymore." "Yeah, well, it's a bad night to be walking." James pulled back onto the highway. "I'm James." "Michael." The man settled into his seat, pulling the seatbelt across his chest. "Appreciate this. Really." They drove in silence for a few minutes. The rain hammered against the roof of the car. James turned up the heat, trying to combat the chill that Michael had brought in with him. "So what's got you hitchhiking in weather like this?" James asked, more to fill the silence than anything else. Michael was quiet for a moment. "Car broke down about 40 miles back. Couldn't afford a tow. Figured I'd try to get home and deal with it tomorrow." "That's rough. You got family in Millerton?" "Something like that." The way Michael said it made James decide not to push further. He focused on the road. The rain was starting to let up slightly, but visibility was still poor. The highway stretched out ahead of them, empty in both directions. After about 10 minutes, James glanced in his rearview mirror to check the road behind him. That's when he saw Michael sitting in the back seat. James's heart jumped. He jerked his head to the right. Michael was still in the passenger seat, staring out the window. James looked in the rearview mirror again. Michael was in the back seat, sitting directly behind the passenger side, staring straight ahead with that same blank expression. James blinked hard. When he looked in the mirror a third time, the back seat was empty. "You okay?" Michael asked from the passenger seat. Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired. Been a long day." "I hear that." Michael leaned his head against the window. "Mind if I close my eyes for a bit? I'll wake up when we get close to Millerton." "Sure, go ahead." Michael closed his eyes. Within a minute, his breathing had deepened into what sounded like sleep. James kept driving, but his hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter now. He told himself it was just exhaustion. He'd been on the road for hours. His mind was playing tricks on him. That's all it was. He didn't look in the rearview mirror for the next 5 miles. But eventually he had to. Just a quick glance to check the road behind him. Michael was in the back seat again. Same position as before. But this time his eyes were open, and he was staring directly at James in the mirror. James's blood went cold. He snapped his eyes back to Michael in the passenger seat. Still sleeping. Still leaning against the window with his eyes closed. When James looked in the mirror again, the back seat was empty. His hands started shaking. This wasn't exhaustion. This was something else. Something wrong. James's phone was in the cup holder. He wanted to call someone, but who? The police? And tell them what? That he was seeing his passenger in two places at once? They'd think he was having some kind of breakdown. The sign for Millerton appeared in his headlights. 5 miles. "Hey, Michael," James said, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. "We're almost there." Michael didn't move. Didn't open his eyes. Michael. Still nothing. James reached over and touched Michael's shoulder. The man's skin was ice cold even through the damp hoodie. Michael's eyes snapped open. "We're here already?" His voice was the same. Quiet. Polite. Like nothing was wrong. Almost. "Where do you want me to drop you?" "There's a gas station right off the exit." "That'll work fine." James took the Millerton exit. The gas station was closed, dark except for a single security light over the pumps. He pulled into the parking lot and stopped the car. Michael unbuckled his seatbelt. "Thanks again. You're a lifesaver." "No problem." Michael reached back to grab his backpack from the back seat. His hand passed through empty air. He turned and looked at the back seat. There was no backpack. Could have sworn I put it back there. Michael checked under the seat. Around his feet. Must have left it on the side of the road. Damn. He opened the door and stepped out into the drizzle. Before he closed it, he leaned back in. "Drive safe, James." The door closed. Michael walked across the parking lot and disappeared around the side of the gas station building. James sat there for a moment, his heart still racing. Then he looked in the rearview mirror to back out of the parking space. Michael was sitting in the back seat. James screamed and whipped around. The back seat was empty. When he looked in the mirror again, Michael was still there, sitting exactly where his reflection had been, staring at James with those deep-set eyes. James threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the parking lot. He got back on the highway and drove. 50 miles per hour. 60. 70. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. Kept his eyes locked on the road ahead. But he could feel it. Someone sitting in the back seat. Someone breathing. After 20 minutes, James couldn't take it anymore. He had to look. Had to know. He adjusted the rearview mirror. Michael was there. Sitting directly behind him now. Leaning forward. Close enough that James could see every detail of his face in the reflection. The rainwater still dripping from his hair. The pale skin. The eyes that didn't quite look right. Too dark. Too empty. "You should have kept driving," Michael said. His voice came from right behind James's ear, but when James spun around, the back seat was empty. James pulled over onto the shoulder, his whole body shaking. He turned on the interior light and twisted in his seat to look at the back. Nothing. No one. Just empty seats and the faint smell of rain. He grabbed his phone and called 911. "What's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. "I picked up a hitchhiker and now I think he's still in my car. I can see him in my mirror but he's not really there. I don't know what's happening." "Sir, are you alone in the vehicle?" "I think so. I don't know. I can see him but when I turn around he's not there." "Can you describe this person?" "His name is Michael. Gray hoodie. Dark hair. I dropped him off at the Millerton exit but he's still in my car. He's still here." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, what exit did you say?" "Millerton. The gas station off Highway 47. Another pause. Longer this time. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay calm. What's your current location?" James gave her his mile marker. She told him to stay on the line. Said an officer was on the way. While he waited, James couldn't help himself. He looked in the rearview mirror one more time. Michael was pressed against the back of James's seat now. His face was inches from James's head, separated only by the headrest. His mouth was open like he was screaming but no sound came out. The police arrived 12 minutes later. 2 officers. They searched James's car with flashlights, checked the trunk, looked under the seats. They found nothing. No evidence anyone had been in the car except James. One of the officers, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, asked James to describe the hitchhiker again. Gray hoodie. Dark hair. Called himself Michael. Said he was trying to get to Millerton. The officer exchanged a look with her partner. Mr. Porter, when exactly did you pick this person up? About an hour ago. Maybe a little more. Why? And you dropped him at the gas station off the Millerton exit? Yes. What's going on? The officer pulled out her phone and showed James a photograph. It was a driver's license photo. The face was Michael's. Same dark hair. Same deep-set eyes. Same pale complexion. Is this him? Yes, that's him. Who is he? His name was Michael Torrance. 5 years ago he was hitchhiking on Highway 47 during a rainstorm. A semi-truck hit him near the Millerton exit. Killed him instantly. His body was found near the gas station. James felt like the floor of the car had dropped out from under him. That's not possible. I just talked to him. He was in my car. He was real. You're the fourth person to report picking him up in the past 3 years, the officer said quietly. Every time it's the same description. Same story. And every time the person who picks him up reports seeing him in their rearview mirror after dropping him off. The other officer spoke up. The first guy who reported it? He was so convinced someone was in his car that he drove off the highway at 80 miles an hour. Crashed into a tree. Said he was trying to get away from what he saw in his mirror. The second woman who picked him up drove straight to the police station and refused to get back in her car. The first officer continued. Said she could still see him sitting in her back seat. Sold the car a week later. Last we heard, she moved out of state. James looked at his rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. But he knew if he looked again in 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days, Michael would be there. Sitting behind him. Staring with those empty eyes. What do I do? James whispered. The officer didn't have an answer. James drove home that night with his rearview mirror angled up at the ceiling. He couldn't see the road behind him, but he didn't care. Anything was better than seeing Michael sitting in his back seat. When he got home, he parked in his driveway and sat there for 20 minutes, too afraid to look in the mirror, too afraid to get out of the car. Finally, he forced himself to move. He opened the door and practically ran to his house. For 3 days, James didn't drive his car. He called in sick to work. Stayed inside. Tried to convince himself it had been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. On the 4th day he needed groceries. He got in his car, started the engine, and told himself he wouldn't look in the rearview mirror. He'd adjust it up like before. He'd be fine. But as he backed out of the driveway, his eyes flicked to the mirror out of habit. Michael was there. Sitting in the back seat. Exactly where he'd been that night on the highway. And this time he smiled. James sold the car 2 days later. Took a loss on it. Didn't care. The new owner was a college kid who was thrilled to get such a good deal. James never told him about Michael. He wonders sometimes if the kid has looked in his rearview mirror yet. If he's seen the passenger who never left. If he understands that some people don't stop hitchhiking just because they're dead. And late at night, when James drives his new car, he still keeps the rearview mirror angled at the ceiling. He tells himself it's just a habit. That he's being paranoid. But the truth is he's terrified that one day he'll look in that mirror and Michael will be there anyway. Waiting patiently in the back seat. The way he's been waiting for everyone who was kind enough to pick him up on a rainy night on Highway 47. The way he'll keep waiting forever. Jason Rivera's neighbors moved out years ago, but he still heard their routines through the walls every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. Jason moved into the duplex on Harlow Street in March of 2019. It was an older building, split down the middle with mirror image floor plans. He rented the left side. The right side was occupied by the Brennan family. Tom and Linda Brennan and their 2 kids. A boy around 8 and a girl maybe 5 or 6 years old. Jason only met them once. The day he moved in, Tom came over with a six-pack of beer and introduced himself. Seemed like a nice guy. Worked in sales, talked a lot about baseball. Linda waved from their front porch but never came over. The kids were playing in the backyard and Jason never got a good look at them. Tom mentioned they'd been living there for about 3 years. Said the walls were thin, so if Jason's TV was ever too loud, just let them know. Jason said the same. They shook hands. That was it. For the first few months, Jason barely noticed them. Sometimes he'd hear footsteps through the wall. The occasional sound of the TV or the kids playing. Normal neighbor noises. Nothing that bothered him. Then in July, Jason came home from work and saw a moving truck parked outside. The Brennan side of the duplex had its front door propped open and 2 guys were carrying boxes out. Jason parked and walked over. "You guys moving?" he asked Tom, who was standing by the truck with a clipboard. Tom looked tired. Dark circles under his eyes. He nodded. "Yeah. Got a job offer in Phoenix. Better pay. Better schools for the kids." "That's great. Congratulations." Tom forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks. Hey, sorry we didn't give you a heads up. Everything happened really fast." They talked for another minute. Jason wished them luck. Tom shook his hand, his grip was weak, distracted, and went back to supervising the movers. By evening the truck was gone. The Brennan side of the duplex was empty. Jason figured he'd have new neighbors within a month. But weeks went by and nobody moved in. The "for rent" sign went up in the yard. Then it came down. Then it went back up. Jason asked the landlord about it once. The guy said he was having trouble finding tenants. Something about needing to do repairs first. That was fine with Jason. He liked having the place to himself. No shared walls meant no noise. He could watch TV as loud as he wanted. Play music. Have friends over without worrying. But then the sound started. It was a Tuesday night in late September. Jason woke up suddenly, his heart pounding for no reason he could identify. He checked his phone. 3:17 a.m. He lay there in the dark, trying to figure out what had woken him. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Coming from the other side of the wall. Heavy footsteps, like someone walking across a hardwood floor. They moved from what would have been the living room into the kitchen area. Jason heard cabinets opening and closing. The sound of running water. Someone was in the empty duplex. Jason sat up, his mind racing. Squatters probably. Or maybe the landlord had finally rented it out and forgot to mention it. He listened for another few minutes. The footsteps moved upstairs. He heard lighter footsteps too. Smaller. Like kids running. Then everything went quiet. Jason lay back down. He'd asked the landlord about it in the morning. He drifted back to sleep. The next night the same thing happened. 3:17 a.m. Jason woke up to the sound of footsteps through the wall. The same pattern. Living room to kitchen. Cabinets opening. Water running. Footsteps going upstairs. This time Jason got up. He went to his front door and looked out the window. The Brennan side of the duplex was completely dark. No lights. No cars in the driveway. He grabbed a flashlight and went outside, checking the windows. They were all locked. No signs of forced entry. Through the glass he could see the empty interior. No furniture. No people. But he could still hear the footsteps. Jason called the landlord the next morning. The guy insisted nobody had rented it. Nobody had the keys except him and the maintenance guy. He said he'd come by and check it out, but he sounded annoyed, like Jason was wasting his time. The landlord showed up that afternoon with the maintenance guy. They searched the empty duplex while Jason waited outside. 20 minutes later they came out. "Nobody's in there," the landlord said. "No sign anyone's been inside since the Brennans left. You probably just heard the house settling. These old places make all kinds of noises." Jason wanted to argue but didn't. He thanked them and they left. That night, 3:17 a.m., the sounds came again. Footsteps. Cabinets. Water running. And this time Jason heard voices. muffled like they were coming from far away, but definitely voices. A man's voice, a woman's, and children laughing. Jason pressed his ear against the wall. He could almost make out words. The man was saying something about breakfast. The woman replied, but Jason couldn't understand her. The children's laughter echoed through the walls. He grabbed his phone and recorded it. 30 seconds of audio. The footsteps, the voices, all of it. Then he called the police. 2 officers showed up within 20 minutes. Jason played them the recording. They listened, exchanged a glance, and agreed to check the property. They went next door with flashlights. Jason watched from his window as their flashlight beams swept through the empty rooms. They came back 15 minutes later. "There's nobody in there, sir. The place is completely empty. Locked up tight." "But you heard the recording," Jason said. "We heard something. Could be pipes. Could be sound traveling from another property. These old buildings have weird acoustics sometimes." They took a report to humor him and left. Jason didn't sleep the rest of that night. He sat in his living room with every light on, listening. The sounds continued until almost 4 a.m., then stopped abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch. The next day, Jason went to the local library. He searched through old newspaper archives, looking for anything about the duplex on Harlow Street. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly. Just something. Anything. He found it in a newspaper from 2003. A small article buried in the local section. Family of 4 found dead in Harlow Street residence. Jason's hands started shaking as he read. Thomas and Linda Brennan. Their 2 children, Michael and Emma. All 4 found dead in their beds. Carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty furnace. The article said they likely died in their sleep, sometime in the early morning hours. Jason checked the date of the article. September 2003. 16 years ago. But that didn't make sense. He'd met Tom Brennan. Shook his hand. Watched them move out. He kept digging. Found the property records. The duplex had been owned by the same landlord since 2001. But according to the records, the right side hadn't been rented since 2003. For 16 years it had sat empty. Jason's mouth went dry. He searched for anything about the Brennans. Found their obituaries. Tom had been 34. Linda was 32. Michael was 8. Emma was 5. The funeral was held at Riverside Memorial Chapel. He found one more thing. A photo. A family photo that accompanied one of the obituaries. Jason stared at it. Tom, Linda, and their 2 kids. The same family he'd met. The same man he'd shaken hands with. The same kids he'd seen playing in the backyard. He drove to Riverside Memorial Chapel. Asked if they had any records of the Brennan funeral. The woman at the front desk checked her files and confirmed it. September 18, 2003. All 4 buried at Greenwood Cemetery. Jason went to Greenwood Cemetery. Found the graves. 4 headstones in a row. Thomas Brennan, 1969 to 2003. Linda Brennan, 1971 to 2003. Michael Brennan, 1995 to 2003. Emma Brennan, 1998 to 2003. "We're still here," a voice said behind him. Jason spun around. Tom Brennan was standing 10 feet away. He looked exactly the same as the day Jason had met him. Same clothes. Same tired expression. "You can see us," Tom said. It wasn't a question. Jason couldn't speak. His legs felt weak. Linda appeared next to Tom. Then the kids. All 4 of them standing in front of their own graves. "Most people can't," Linda said. Her voice was sad. "Most people never know we're there." "You died," Jason managed to say. 16 years ago. Tom nodded. "We never left the house. We didn't know we were dead at first. We just kept going through our routine. Wake up, make breakfast, get the kids ready for school. Every day the same. It took us a long time to understand." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you can hear us," Emma said. The little girl stepped forward. "Nobody's heard us in so long. We've been trying to leave," Michael added. We know we're supposed to, but we can't figure out how. Jason backed away. I can't help you. I don't know how to. We're not asking for help, Tom interrupted. We're asking you to remember us. That's all. Just remember we were here. That we were real. Jason turned and ran. Got in his car and drove. He didn't stop until he was back at the duplex. He threw his belongings into suitcases, packed everything he could fit in his car and left. Broke his lease. Forfeited his deposit. Didn't care. He crashed on a friend's couch for 2 weeks until he found a new apartment across town. He never went back to Harlow Street. But sometimes late at night he still hears them. Footsteps through walls that aren't there. Cabinets opening in kitchens that don't exist. Children laughing in rooms that are empty. And every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., his phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. He never opens them anymore. But the preview is always the same. We're still here. Jason looked into what happened to the other tenants who'd lived in his side of the duplex over the years. Found 5 previous renters between 2003 and 2019. Every single one of them broke their lease early. None of them stayed longer than 4 months. The landlord still rents it out. The listing claims it's a quiet property. Perfect for someone looking for peace and solitude. And technically that's true. The neighbors are very quiet. They've been dead for 16 years. But every night at 3:17 a.m., they wake up and start their day, not knowing they're never going to leave. Not knowing that no one will ever see them again. Except for the people who move in next door. The people who can hear them through the walls. The people who eventually figure out the truth and run. The duplex on Harlow Street is still there. Still split down the middle with mirror image floor plans. And if you're ever looking for a place to rent in that neighborhood, you might see the listing. Great price. Recently renovated. Available immediately. Just know that you won't be living there alone. The family next door never moved out. They're still going through their morning routine. Still making breakfast. Still getting their kids ready for a school day that will never come. Still waiting for someone to remember they existed at all.